Okay, welcome. I call this Land Use Committee meeting of Tuesday, November 20th here at Carnegie Town Hall to order. First order of business is approval of minutes. Would one of you like to make a motion, please?
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Same sign. Okay, that has passed. And on our one and only item is engineering design standards presented by the Public Works staff. So welcome, Mr. Heavey.
Good afternoon, Chad Heavey with the Engineering Division of Public Works. Just like the City Council has ordinances and the building people have their building codes, we also have 16 chapters of engineering design standards that we follow when we construct public improvements. And so when I say public improvements, I mean things like the city's building a new road, the city's replacing a road, we're putting in a new water line, or also if a developer is building new infrastructure in a subdivision and then dedicating it. These are kind of the rules and regulations that they have to follow to ensure we get a good product. And so some examples of what I'm talking about would be minimum pipe sizes to make sure we can meet fire flows, and how deep should a pipe be buried so that it doesn't freeze, or how should fire hydrants be spaced so we have adequate coverage to fight fires. So those types of things. These standards are reviewed annually and updated accordingly. City ordinance does require that the City Council approve these by resolution, and these proposed updates have been reviewed and recommended by IRAB. One of the main duties of the Infrastructure Review and Advisory Board, one of the listed duties, is to review and recommend revisions to the engineering design standards, which they have done. That board is made up of 7 members. There's members from Public Works and Planning and Development Services, and then there's 5 members, each member representing the Sioux Empire Home Builders Association, the Contractors Association, private utility companies like Excel or Mid-American Gas, and then a member at large. This is just a picture of the last meeting we had. This is out at the Water Reclamation plant. The one thing I'll point out is that the board members are sitting on the right of the screen, and everybody else, I would say, is just other interested people that usually attend these meetings. Today, a lot of the proposed updates are housekeeping, they're clarifications, and we're not going to really touch on any of those. We're just going to highlight some of the changes that we think are important to bring to your attention. And please, if there's any questions throughout the presentation, just stop us and let's try to get those questions answered. We have 3 of our principal engineers tonight who are kind of our subject matter experts in their different disciplines will be presenting the proposed updates. And so with that, I will turn it over to Wes Phillips, and he will take us through his changes.
Thank you. Wes Phillips with Public Works Engineering Division. I am the principal street engineer involving sidewalks, streets, and also bridges. Our first chapter we have here is Street Design and Pavement Thickness, Chapter 8. This goes through the details that we would use to design a street section. And in this section, we are revising the minimum street grade from 0.5 to 0.6, which should facilitate better street drainage in our gutters. The next changes are in Chapter 16. Chapter 16 is our accessible sidewalk chapter, and this chapter was added in 2017 to consolidate and improve our sidewalk standards, and now we're coming back about a little over a year later to make some updates. All of these were requested in a review of Federal Highway, so that's why we're bringing these forward, and they have been presented to IRAB and approved before this meeting. The first section we changed was just a reference to the International Building Code, which governs the the accessibility of sidewalks that are not within the public right-of-way. So Federal Highway preferred that we also reference that code. And the section below that, we also added guidance from the IBC for ramps that are outside of the public right-of-way, for example, in front of a church or a city building. So those guidelines are now a part of our requirements as well. And the next section we edited was relating to T intersections. Before there wasn't much guidance on how to design a crossing at a T intersection. So we added clarifications that we do want the opportunity for pedestrians to be able to cross at a T intersection. So for the intersection to the right, we might not be able to allow people to cross the southern route as there's a driveway there. But crossing that street on the north side, might be an option that we would look at as a part of a development design or a street reconstruction. And the final section that we clarified was 16.8.2, which essentially clarified push button location requirements at signalized intersections, and also incorporated the recent manual on uniform traffic control devices guidance to make sure that we are complying with all of the most recent best practices out there. Before we move on to water mains, are there any questions on the street and sidewalk topics? Yes.
That T intersection, so what are you planning to do to make that easier to cross? What would that look like?
So we would be, right now you can essentially go north and south at that intersection. A person with a disability or pushing a stroller could not cross to the west side of the street there. If you can see, there's a tree in the way.
You mean lining up so you wanted to line up the one sidewalk to another sidewalk, is that part of it? Because there's no sidewalk, you can't get out to the street on that one side by the tree, right?
Yep, so what we were looking at doing is adding, a ramp where that pointer was at. We would add a curb ramp to allow people to cross the street across that main street there. Whereas before they would have to essentially go to a different intersection.
Or go down to somebody's driveway.
Yep.
And try to zigzag across over there.
Yep, and driveways, for accessibility reasons, they're steeper typically than what a ramp would be. So it's not considered an actual crossing, even though a lot of people would use that as a crossing.
And these, even though that's not on a corner, then that would be required to have the ADA accessibility thing.
Yep, we'd put the detectable warning panel, the red panel, in there.
Okay, and then this, what is MUTC, what is that?
That's the manual on uniform traffic control devices, and that governs the standards for all of our traffic signals.
And are we talking just existing traffic signals that have a light? Or are you talking about putting more push things in the city? What do you call those push lights?
The push
pedestrian,
buttons, the pedestrian push buttons, when we reconstruct a project or construct a new project, this would govern where those buttons are located. There's requirements on how far a person has to reach, mainly for people in wheelchairs. So they don't have to reach too far from the landing area that is concrete.
Okay, and then I know we're having to move along here, but how do you determine who gets one of those push button crosswalk lights? Is that, it's always connected to a stoplight?
Yep, it'd be signalized intersections or where we would have push buttons, and we have a plan to adopt them as we reconstruct or upgrade those intersections. We'll be using the new accessible pedestrian push buttons.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, we'll have Nick Borns with our water chapter.
Thank you, Wes. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Nick Borns. I'm Principal Engineer for Water and Light and Power. I'll be talking about updates to design standards for Chapter 10, which is water mains, and then Chapter 15, which is roadway lighting. I guess to start with Chapter 10, the updates that we are focused on for this round of updates is the water service line materials and fire hydrant location and spacing. When we worked on these updates, we did coordinate with a few different groups. We coordinated with City of Sioux Falls Water Maintenance Team, our fire prevention team, local material suppliers, and then the American Water Works Association, or AWWA. For our fire hydrant updates, I guess we had two separate updates to this section. The first is the hydrant spacing, and that was updated in section 10.2.1, and we laid out those spacing updates in accordance with fire code, basically just mirrored their updates. The other update that we had was to the hydrant clearance language, and that had to do with specifically the distance from between hydrants and light poles or traffic light poles. And we do that so we can safely maintain and replace hydrants if necessary without affecting the poles. The other notable update that we made to Chapter 10 pertains to the service lines. And again, we've got two separate updates that were made to this section. The first has to do with the service line materials, and we made some updates in accordance with the AWWA standards. Again, they made a few updates, and we mimicked the updates accordingly. The other update that we made was to section 10.7.9, and that pertains to disconnection or retirement of services. We want to do that at the mains if possible. Chapter 15 pertains to roadway lighting. We just had a couple of updates on this section, I guess. Primarily, these updates were focused on luminaires, and specifically the type of luminaire based on street classifications that they are being installed. And then we also focused on the types of connections for the luminaires. And this coordination, again, was done in part with, I guess, City of Sioux Falls engineering staff. We worked with the Light and Power team, also local contractors and development engineers to come up with some clarifications really on some of these different luminaire updates. I guess that's the conclusion of the water and light and power updates. Are there any questions?
I do have one.
Okay.
When we have a change in standards regarding luminaires, and let's say that the standard has increased, therefore now we have a lot of situations where they do not meet standard. What's our policy? Do we just replace those as needed with, so that they then meet the new standard? It's not that we go back and retrofit everything at the same time.
It's basically from this point forward. But you know, some of those areas, like for example, the LED, the Light and Power Division has a program where they go in and select different areas where they try to make those updates. So I guess when we make these updates to the design standards, we are trying to target some of these areas in some circumstances where we're trying to get them up to the current standards, but it's not necessarily needing to go backwards, I guess. It's from this point forward.
Sure. Okay. Are there any other questions from members? All right. Thank you very much. Yes, Councilor Staley, go ahead.
I think we've talked about this in the past, but if somebody wants to have a street light put in, they think it's really a dark stretch of road, what are the mandates for that?
I guess the first step would be contacting our Light and Power Division, and then they would do an investigation.
So is there any cost to those people living along the street? If, investigation, I would think means you drive through there at night to see how dark it is?
So they've got a program where they can try to prioritize some updates in areas that would warrant better lighting.
Is there like a certain formula that you say we're going to have a street light every half a block?
You know, I'm not sure what their formula is. I guess when they do their investigation on existing conditions, I would have to talk with the Light and Power Division and find out how they would prioritize those.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And I can add a little to that because I know during our National Night Out activities this year, I was in my former neighborhood and had individuals that approached me about their street and concerned that it was dark in the evening. And within the week, they had another light that was attached to an existing pole. All they had to do was attach the light and wire it. And then they did change out to the LED lights, I think on the other two existing corners, so that it was a little brighter, and they even did a little tree trimming that would allow more light. So it was a very quick response within, like I said, a 7-day period of time. So,
So which department did they call?
I contacted Public Works, who then assigned that to.
If you would just contact Public Works at 8600, 367 8600. When they come out and do the investigation, there's lots of things they're looking at. Is there power there? What side of the street is the power on? And it's one of the biggest, you know, if the city goes into neighborhoods to try to do some cleanup or improvements like that, that's one of the biggest improvements that can be made, is to add lighting, and it has a lot of positive effects on everything. And so
Well, and as Councilor Kiley said, if there was a pole there already, that probably helps a lot, because isn't putting the pole in some of the biggest expense?
and a lot of times there may be a pole close by that's serving another function. We can just put a light on, like you mentioned. So Jerry and his team will come out, take a look, and usually there's a solution.
Correct. And in that situation, there was a pole, there was electricity there was already a line. It was just a matter of attaching the arm to it and hooking it up. Jerry and his team reacted very quickly. So,
Good.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks. Next up is Lance Weatherly.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Nick. Welcome, Lance.
Welcome, thank you, Land Use Committee. I was originally going to say good afternoon because we were scheduled for 4:30, but I'm going to say good evening now since we're just about 6. I'm Lance Weatherly, Principal Drainage Engineer for the City of Sioux Falls. Going to be covering Chapter 11, Drainage Improvements, Chapter 12, Erosion and Sediment Control, and Chapter 13, Plan Submittals. The updates we are proposing for Chapter 11 drainage improvements address and provide some additional flexibility with stormwater ponds. Our current engineering design standard requires stormwater ponds based on project size alone. This can provide scenarios where the same developer can be required to have a pond on one side of the road and still drain into another pond that they built on the other side of the road. This is referred to in the industry as double ponding. Public Works was approached by the development community about considering alternatives to essentially manage the net effect of drainage. After considering the request, engineering has developed proposed updates which we're coining performance-based standards for drainage improvements. The performance-based standards were reviewed twice by an IRAB subcommittee. It is a subcommittee of regular attendees at IRAB, and that was comprised of a number of residential and commercial developers and consulting engineers. The IRAB subcommittee met twice to discuss the proposed updates. Subsequently, the updates were recently approved by IRAB as well. Next, going to talk about the hybrid platting fee. In reviewing plating fees of the city master drainage plan, development trends show the single-family plating fees being collected at higher projected target revenues. The image you see on the screen is essentially a snapshot. The yellow is showing where single-family has developed in the city since our city master drainage plan that was developed in 2003. This is, since single-family plating rates are the lowest rate, the stormwater collection fund has not been collecting its anticipated revenues to construct our regional facilities and other improvements. To improve the drainage plating fee fund, a hybrid plating fee approach is being proposed as an intermediate between single family and higher land uses generating higher runoff. The hybrid plating fee will not be associated with single family residential homes. It will be associated with commercial, institutional, multifamily land uses with greater impervious area that generate higher runoff. Chapter 12, erosion and sediment control updates. The picture you see in front is commonly used in the community when projects are going on. It's called inlet protection, and what that does is a filter that keeps sediment-laden waters from construction out of our storm drainage system, so we don't have to jet and clean out that sediment, nor will that prevent that sediment from polluting the waters of the Big Sioux River. The purpose of these updates is any project in the state of South Dakota that disturbs greater than 1 acre is required to obtain a permit from the South Dakota Environment and Natural Resources. The DNR recently updated their permit language, and essentially these updates are incorporating the DNR's updated permit language. Chapter 13 is basically a housekeeping update. There is one sentence in there that would conflict with the proposed Chapter 11 updates. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding Chapter 11, 12, or 13.
And Councilor Staley.
Let's go back to that Chapter 11. Is this the last part of it? Mr. Chair?
I believe this is, and they're just flying along.
Yeah, you're flying. They gave you 60 minutes.
60 minutes, and they're going to come in well under that.
Flying.
So
okay, so I could ask a few questions. All right. Okay, the Chapter 11, what do you mean? I'm not sure. You said single family has the lowest rate of the hybrid drainage, whatever, what was, I'm not sure what you were saying there. And then you said that, I got the sense they're not paying as much single family, so that you're going to be increasing the fees you put on the businesses and big multi-use facilities.
So storm drainage is funded by two different funding sources. There is the annual drainage fee that is paid by all real property, and then there is the drainage cost recovery, which is paid by development. The cost recovery recoups 50% of the cost of building regional stormwater facilities from development, and the other 50% is funded by property owners. With the
wait, what's a regional stormwater facility?
A regional BMP. It's from the 2003 master plan. There are regional BMPs around Sioux Falls. Certain locations would be in the Copper Creek subdivision, near the pond, near Avera on.
What does that look? What does that mean? It's just a detention pond.
It's a city-owned regional stormwater facility that treats stormwater for development that drains onto it.
You mean by Avera there? There's one of those facilities?
On the west side of Sioux Falls,
Oh.
on Ellis Road. Other examples are on South Galway Avenue, that body of water there, that is considered a regional stormwater facility.
And there are employees working there?
It's not mechanical at all. It's not like a mechanical treatment plant. The city has approximately 200 drainage properties scattered throughout the city. So stormwater, our treatment plant is scattered throughout the city in multiple locations and regional stormwater facilities and other detention ponds and channels and things like that. So it's not a mechanical facility that has motors and things like that. It's treated based off gravity and settlement of silt out of stormwater when it comes into a pond.
Oh, so that's funded by the drainage fees, the platting fees.
The regional stormwater facilities are funded 50% by platting fees, 50% by drainage fees.
And I would think, I mean, once that's established, that's kind of a cost that's already, I would think the initial cost is in establishing that, correct?
The initial cost, yes, establishing that and also projecting future facility costs, because we still have a number of facilities that we are planning, regional facilities that we are planning to construct as the city grows. So we are bringing updated standards forward because what we've seen is when a developer constructs essentially a Walmart and has to build a stormwater pond, the release rate that comes out of that pond is generally equivalent to a single family runoff. Well, there's so much single family runoff, we're collecting more acres at that lowest rate, so we're not meeting our targeted revenue goals. So we've developed this hybrid platting fee that's a little higher than single family, lower than multifamily or commercial, that will recoup costs to the city for increased conveyance costs downstream of facilities and pipes.
So how does that look? That's going to be like applied to apartment buildings, any bigger facility in that area?
All property that is platted within the city pays the drainage system cost recovery platting fee. Any property that is platted within a regional stormwater facility also pays the regional development charge only if your stormwater goes to this regional facility.
So give me an example of a business that's going to be affected.
All property. The engineering design standards apply to all improvements within the city. So any business that coming in a new high school site with Gage Brothers, our like Mills Fleet Farm recently, our additional development out at Foundation Park, they will have to comply with updated engineering design standards regarding stormwater drainage.
But their fees are going to go up too? You've got this hybrid platting fee that you said you're going to ask for. It's not funding itself.
It's an additional option for them. It's not, it allows them some additional flexibility with either I have a bunch of little stormwater ponds on every little strip mall in my big commercial development, or I want to pay a hybrid fee to have them in one location. So
it's a choice.
This isn't about the platting fee rate. This is about choice, giving developers additional flexibility on how they want to manage stormwater. If they have to build one pond on one side of the road and another pond on the other side of the road, now they have the flexibility to just build one pond on one side of the road, as long as the runoff meets the net effect we're looking for at the bottom of the subdivision.
And then, interesting, chapter 12. I know that I think Christine Erickson was talking about this on Facebook, of having these netting things by the intakes to catch this, right? That's kind of a thing that's coming, and I'm wondering, is that something just anybody in a neighborhood can put one of these things up, or how's the city encouraging just the average citizen to participate in this?
the storm drainage team has identified a couple pilot projects that we are going to utilize this proposal by Councilmember Erickson. So we're planning to incorporate that and see how that works. Now, we would want citizens, before they start putting nets across the public channels, that get any approval from the city before that, if it's any public drainage facilities.
But I think this could be more widely advertised. That, I mean, do they have to get something, a special, it looks like you got two pieces of a concrete block there. I mean, are there special things you can get, or do you just put a big bale of hay in front of it? Or, I mean, what?
The stormwater, there are a lot of different options that are potential to do that. I guess, is there anything more?
Well, I mean, do you go and buy these things someplace, or where do you get something like this in the picture?
Andy Berg, Public Works. What's in the picture is inlet protection, and that's solely required during construction activities. Mm-hmm. The contractors have to put that in. We don't want to see those in areas where there is no construction activity, because we want those inlets to function as they were designed. The inlet protection is solely for silt and sediment. What you're speaking about with the nets is more for after construction, like collection of garbage and that type of thing. Those are things that we are looking to retrofit into existing areas through like sump inlets, where we have the inlet, the bottom of the inlet is like 4 feet lower than the actual pipes that leave it, and having a baffle of some sort in there so that we can collect that material in the bottom of the inlet and then vacuum it out. The nets are another thing that Lance said that we're looking to retrofit into a couple areas to pilot those to see how they function. If they they're not at the inlet end, they're at the outlet end. So before a pipe discharges out into a pond or a river or something like that, that netting is there to capture all the pop bottles and garbage and wrappers that have come off the streets into the storm inlet, and before it gets out to that water body, we capture it.
So that wouldn't be something that we're going to be able to see just on our residential street then?
No, we want to let that water get off the residential streets into our pipes unobstructed, and then we'll capture that downstream.
Okay, thank you. And then, Lance, one more thing. Unless somebody else wants to say.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I know that this came up recently. I believe you were at the meeting with Doug Bashy.
Correct.
And so just for the record, in helping us understand that if you're doing new construction and you're building a home next to another home, there's a level of, there's a mandate, a threshold that you have to prove that you're not going to have runoff going into your neighbor's home. Is that correct? I don't know what the right word is.
We have in city engineering design standards, we have a certain threshold that if for engineering to review a permit, it has to be disturbing more than 300 cubic yards. In an infill situation, in a neighborhood that was built like I think in the late 1950s, generally, that was before our current design standards, before our current subdivision standards. There wouldn't necessarily be an engineering plan, and since there's no public drainage associated with that on that private property, we don't have a standard that dictates that. In new subdivisions, we certainly have a lot of standards that require structures be 2 foot above the 100-year water surface elevation, making sure we have good positive drainage. There's minimum grade elevations on every structure to prevent surface waters from touching those structures. In infill situations in neighborhoods that were built in the 1950s, those records aren't available.
Right, and I'm just bringing this up because I hadn't realized that there is a different standard if you're building a house versus this person had been living next to this open area and has concerns about when it's built upon how that water is going to come into their own home. And apparently within our city we don't have, right, Lance? There's nothing really that besides him going up to the guy and saying, please don't hurt my house, do something with the water that's going to run off.
The simple takeaway is there's no public drainage involved in that situation, and the city does not have ordinance to regulate private drainage.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you very much, Lance.
So I just greatly appreciate your time this evening. We always like it when we can come and get into the weeds about engineering design standards. I guess what I would ask, based on you know, our numerous meetings with our different boards and committees, I would tonight request your recommendation that we could take these revisions to the full council in December.
And we won't vote on that, but I think I would be good with that unless there's any other issues or counselors that feel differently.
No, I think that's fine, again, as long as we're understanding that we will still be listening to the public and encouraging people to contact us if they've got concerns. So it's not a done deal, of course.
And I would state that we each have a memorandum in front of us that outlines the proposed revisions to the engineering design standards. Changes are all addressed in red. Anything that's added, obviously, is in red, and anything that's going to be deleted is in red, but has been crossed off. So, and this information is also available on SIRE as well, too. So, if there are not any other questions, thank you very much, because the design standards are there for a purpose. I mean, it's for the protection of our residents, and it's for the efficiency of what all the departments are trying to achieve here as well, too. So I greatly appreciate the time that you have put into this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm also on to you a little bit. Set the time really high, come in under that, and then you can expect it in your an extra bonus in your Christmas present. Okay, we're now at the open discussion portion of our meeting. Counselors, any items that you wish to discuss? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to public comment. Do we have any items? And we do have a member of the public that would like to make a comment.
Yeah, I just tell me what the protocol is, but I sat through it. I've got a couple questions. And if with your permission, Council Chair, I'd like to just ask a couple questions.
Sure, if you would state your name as well, too, Counselor.
But, it has to do with the luminaries.
Counselor, could you speak into the mic? Please state who you are.
Councilmember Janet Brecky. It has to do with the luminaries. And if I had been sitting up there, I'd have asked you these questions. I'm interested because I think we all know that, lighting in neighborhoods has a direct nexus to crime. And I'm wondering if, again, with these new standards, if there's any strategizing or focus being given to seeing to it that the neighborhoods that are identified as higher at risk, are there any neighborhoods that are identified that way, and seeing that those neighborhoods be well lit? Is there, if not, is there opportunity for strategic planning in that area? Because I think it's critical, and when you're in a place where you're doing upgrades and changes like this, have you had those discussions? If not, are you willing to have those discussions, about as you incorporate standards into the city, trying to increase those standards in high-risk neighborhoods?
And so I would respond in that to say that usually there's other departments in the city that are kind of strategizing as to what particular neighborhoods they will go into to look at different aspects of the community and the layout of everything. And so that's when they get us involved. And then, they kind of pick the neighborhood, and I don't know if at this point if it's done in planning and development services, but they work with the police department to identify where to go, and then we are asked to come in. Usually there's some type of a neighborhood meeting, and lights is always kind of if we're in a room with several tables, we always have somebody from Public Works to talk about lights. And like I said, lights is one of the biggest improvements that could be made to improve things. So it's usually our most popular Public Works topic.
And just one further question, because I was unclear. Does this actually increase, is the new standard a higher standard? Is it a brighter standard? Is it the UL lighting or the, what do I call it, the LED lighting?
There is standards and there's modeling software of how streets should be lit based on traffic volumes and lanes. And so those standards are met no matter what the type of lighting is. And so if the certain type of bulb is not as bright, then the poles have to be a little closer together to maintain that coverage. So everything is to meet the standards there for, it'd be no different than coverage for a fire hydrant. It'd be the same for how bright and what's the pattern look like for streetlights.
Just one more.
Yeah, you're
So
fine.
Would it make sense to look at, again,
Counselor, again, could you speak into the
would it
microphone?
make sense to look at high-risk neighborhoods and identify them and, perhaps look into a special standard for those kinds of things? Or do the standards that exist cover that option?
I would say the existing standards cover that, because if we go into a neighborhood and we are specifically looking for spots that are potentially dark, and so if those standards aren't met, if the standards aren't met, we're going to try to meet them when we go through those neighborhoods. So the standards are there. It'd be no different if we, like you mentioned, do we bring everything up to standard at once? No. If we went back into a neighborhood to reconstruct a street, at that point, we would bring everything up to standard, including the lights. If we're not there to do a project and we're there just to see what we can do to improve the lighting, we're going to try to follow those same standards if we can.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chad, for the explanation, and thank you, Counselor, for those questions. There is anybody else that would like to contribute to public comment portion? Okay, seeing none, then before I conclude this meeting, since I didn't do it earlier, I do wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, everybody on the council, and all the citizens in the city of Sioux Falls a very happy and safe Thanksgiving. This meeting is adjourned.